Hello, welcome back to another video. I'm so glad that you're here. Today I wanted to talk a little bit about my art journey because I've just been working on so many paintings lately that have me so inspired, and I thought it would be a great time to talk about this while I show you the process of one of my latest paintings. When I talk about my art journey, I think it's a little bit hard for me to think of when exactly it started because obviously I have always been loving art. I always worked on drawings and little paintings since I was little, but I guess the time that I started taking it seriously was right around the time that I was gonna graduate high school. That was the first time that I started to consider what I wanted to do once I got out of school, and I knew that I wanted an art career, but I didn't really know what you could even do with art in general. Like, I know that I enjoyed art as a hobby, but I didn't know how to monetize it. So the first thing I thought of was getting into fashion design. And I loved fashion for so long. So I remember having a bunch of sketchbooks of different outfits that I will design, collecting fashion magazines, and that's always been a really big part of my art and how I grew within art. And eventually, once I graduated high school, I did go to a fashion design school for like around 2 years, year and a half. It was really fun. I did enjoy it a lot, but after going to that school, I realized that maybe fashion design wasn't exactly the route I wanted to take with my art, and I did learn a lot of things that I still use today. So I do think that even though I didn't stick with it, it was such an important part of my growth to go to that school, and I don't regret it at all, and I'm so glad that I did it. I think one of the things that I still use today that I learned there, well, there's many, but on the technical side, I would say that I learned a lot of how to do sketches and designing and drafting before you make the final product. So for example, I do a lot now of my sketches and ideas for my paintings, and then I trace them with the transfer paper on the canvas. These are all techniques that I learned there. Then I also started to open up my mind a little bit about different mediums. Before that, I used to only use pencils, markers, and watercolors, but it was after I started fashion school that I first started using gouache, which kind of like changed everything for me because it was like this great in between of watercolors but more opaque, and I don't know, it was kind of closer to what I wanted to use with my art, I guess. And I was still very unexperienced when it comes to like art materials and everything, so every information I had before I got from like YouTube videos and other artists online. So I was still very unfamiliar with different mediums that I could try out, and it was nice that I was kind of forced into it because, well, not forced, but I was encouraged to use it because my teachers, and maybe I don't think I would have tried that if it wasn't the case. And then through gouache, I later transitioned to acrylics, which is now my favorite medium that I use every single day. So it was a really good experience for me. And then on the less technical side of it, I learned a lot about experimenting with art as well because I was very into my safe space and very scared to leave it. But of course, that's kind of what school is for, and they challenge you and they make you do things that you don't really want to do, you don't really understand why you're doing them, but I see now how important it was because it just helped me step out of that comfort zone regardless if it's something I was going to continue doing or not. I think that one of the things that I liked the most that I was assigned to do at work was a lot of mood boards as well, and again, it was something that I've never done before because I don't know, I guess I was just very closed-minded before I went to school, and I never went outside of just drawing on my sketchbook. So I used a lot of collaging, I experimented with a lot of media. Obviously, we worked a lot with fabrics, which is something, again, that was new for me. And then eventually that was my first time ever making a painting on canvas. It was also then in school. It was also the first time I ever painted a portrait, which is again something that obviously I still do today, so I can thank that class for that. It was a little bit, I feel like, unrelated to fashion design, but regardless, we were assigned to paint a marchanta, and I hated how mine looked so much. And it was such a humbling moment, but also very eye opening, because before that, I really, obviously, I was wrong, but I really thought of myself like, you know what, I kind of got this. Like, I think I can do it good. I think I can draw well. I think I think I'm good. And then I had that assignment. I was like, oh my god, I have so much to learn. It was so bad, I think I even threw her away, but it was that moment that made me realize like I have so much to practice and learn, and I cannot stay comfortable, because in every sense, mentally, technically, and everything else, I was just staying too in my comfort zone. So I would say that fashion design really helped me with that, regardless if I stayed working with fashion or not. Then after that, I did another year, a year and a half of graphic design, and again, I didn't stick with it either. It was just not what I was looking for either, but I also learned a lot there too. And I think from that class, one of the most important things that I learned, it was one of my teachers. For every design that we did, we had to have a reason for everything. So every line, every color, every symbol, anything that was part of the designs that we made, if he asked you why you made that choice and your answer was I don't know or just because, then that was wrong. You needed to be conscious and you needed to be intentional about your work. And I guess that obviously there's circumstances in art where maybe that's not always the case, but for the most part, that helped me so much to be so intentional with all of my work and to really think about every piece that I create. And it's kind of why I also started working more on the draft portion instead of just jumping into the canvas and just start painting, because I used to do that a lot and then end up hating it or feel like I messed it up because I had an idea in my head that I was not able to execute correctly. And I think a big portion of that was just lack of working on drafts and on designing and then having a clear idea of what is it that I'm trying to make before I even start working. And I'd say that's what I learned from that graphic design school. So from both schools, I did learn a lot and stuff that I think even today are so valuable and such a big part of the way that I do art today. Regardless, after all that, I went to my first class of a fine art school, and it was actually the only class I went to because it was more of a I was allowed to come in to try it out and see if I would sign in for this class, which was like a government program. So I loved it so much, and because of schedule, it didn't end up working out, but that one time that I went, again, I feel like was such a great experience and I learned so much. That was the first time ever that I worked on still life and on landscapes. Before that, like I said, I was in fashion design school, so I worked a lot on bodies and clothes, proportions, anatomy, and then with graphic design, I worked more on. It was mostly about learning how to use programs, designing the kind of things that now I use for my business side, like my socials and my website. But here in this one, is when I realized that I really wanted to just focus on more like a fine arts side of it. After that, I started to do my own research online. So I started looking up on YouTube and on different social medias, different artists and their websites, and I tried to learn directly from them just because I didn't have the opportunity at the time to be on a formal school for painting. It was also a couple years after I had graduated high school and I already it was time for me to get a job, and I feel like one side of me feels like there was a little bit of time wasted because of that, just because of how life works and how the older you get, the more responsibilities you get on you, and the less time you have to just time to learn without having to also have a job, and if you're fortunate enough, which I was, be with your parents and have all that extra help. But it was already a little past that, so now I need to make money, but I also want to take time aside to learn this skill. So I was trying to do it on my own online, and it was a longer process for sure, but it was really fun as well. But now, talking about specifically my art and what I paint, I feel like the transition was a little bit not very smooth. So at first, like I mentioned, I used to work a lot with watercolors, and I had a more stylistic approach to my art. It was a lot more cartoony, and I was very influenced by other comic artists or animators or just that kind of art. Eventually, I started to try a little more into realism, and then eventually, I moved on to making a lot of fan art. And I think the fan art stage was really good for me because even though I moved past it now, it was kind of essential for me to find myself. So I think that fan art was like my very first step into creating something in my own style, I guess, which obviously still copying because a fan art implies that you're drawing somebody else's characters or people, but it still was like a little bit of ingenuity and creativity into how can I take this thing that is already known and is popular and it exists and recreate it in a way that once you see it, you know, I made it. That's the way I tried to see it. And that led into this really crazy long stage of finding my art style. This is a stage that I feel like nobody can skip. It's a canon event, you just have to go through it, but it is definitely one that I wish I could have skipped. It was so frustrating because it's like that key moment where you feel like you need to find your identity. It was more than just an art style. It was like a signature, at least in my eyes. And because I followed a lot of artists that had a very identifiable art style, I feel like until I had mine, I was just not a valid real artist. Because if I saw their art anywhere without seeing their name, I would know who made it. And I feel like my art did not have that. So I started to copy a lot of different art styles from different artists, and obviously it was work that I just did in my sketchbook, and I didn't really share too much because I was just doing it for the sake of practice. It was mostly studious. I didn't want it to come off as like I was copying somebody else's work, but it did help a lot to imitate, and it's something that artists have always done since the beginning of time. You hear about artists going to museums and doing master studies and all of that, so it was kind of like that. But eventually I was doing it so much that I kind of lost myself a little bit. I was trying to put myself in the mindset of these artists, and while I was working on their art style, I tried to be very conscious of why I was doing everything I was doing, and try to ask myself, why did they use these colors? Why do they use this style? Why do they make the eyes this way or the lines this way? And in that way, it wasn't just copying for the sake of copying, but it was more like a learning by imitation. And then eventually, after doing that a lot, I would go through one art style to the next. I got to a point where I was like, okay, I think that I am ready to just do my own thing. And the most important part there was just put aside that mentality of I need an art style. And it was so hard. It's so much harder than it sounds, because it almost feels like without knowing what art style I'm gonna use when I start even doing the first initial sketch, it's almost like I don't know what I'm about to do. But I just tried to rely on the anatomy, the realism, and then just let everything else that I had been practicing for so long just come out naturally. And eventually it happened. Once I started doing things without forcing that style I was trying to create, I realized that I started to make my own little Frankenstein monster of all the other styles I had practiced for so long. And it almost became sacred nature because I had practiced them for so long. After that, I went through a little bit of a creativity slump again, because now I feel like I had this comfortable place I was in with my art style, but now again I was lacking the creativity of what to paint. And I think it was because of that, because of how long I made it my goal to find my art style. That once I did, I realized and I look back like, wow, for years I've just been recreating stuff and I haven't really been even thinking about creating anything with my art, or like even why am I painting. And that really hit me hard. I took a long time to just come back from that, where I would just make studies in my sketchbook so I had something to post online, because I felt like I couldn't take a break from that. But my creativity was very, it was dead. It was dead. Obviously, my main form of expression is paintings, and I think that will be for the rest of my life. I'm not close to anything new because art is always flowing and artists are always changing, but for now, I think painting is gonna be my thing. But something that I did learn is that just because painting is my main thing, it doesn't mean it has to be my only. It was through writing that I really started to step away from just painting for the sake of painting and then having a real idea of what I wanted to say. I think the first time that I started doing this, it was so difficult because I felt like I needed to write something grand and something meaningful and something poetic, but it's really all of that that makes it so hard for me to start things, start new, and step away from the things that are my safe and comfort zone. So after a lot of trying, I realized that sometimes just writing little notes about something that I thought about during my day, something very literal that happened, or even just a little story that came to my mind. Like I would make up stories, and instead of first thinking of the idea and the lesson that I wanted to say through the story and then crafting it, it was more like my brain just created something, I put it down, and then after it was written, I started to kind of look back and try to extract meaning out of it and kind of decipher what made me think of that. That's usually how I do that, and even now I do it with my art as well. It pushed me to just be creative and trust my brain. I would just catch a little idea of something that seemed very surreal, something that seemed like it should have meaning, but I didn't really have any. And it was after it was down on paper, whether it was written down, whether it was drawn and sketched, is that I could, on a side note, start writing down, okay, what do I think of when I look at this or when I read these? What emotions do I feel? What does it relate to? What do I think each part can mean, like any symbolism that I can catch through it? What do I think the colors try to say? All the questions that I think my teacher would ask me about my work, then I ask myself before I go and start the final part of that painting. And I think one of the things that writing helped me a lot too was for me to learn how to write a story or tell a story even through my paintings, because now I've become really, really excited with the ideas of making series instead of just making one painting. I have so much to tell on a story that sometimes I need a follow-up and then a follow-up, and I've been having so much fun doing that. I have a written version on my sketchbook that I don't really show the world. That's kind of like for me, and just to know kind of what direction I want to take for the next one. But when I do share the paintings, I feel like even if you don't know what the story behind it is, it does look like it is trying to say something, and I think that's really fun. And another thing that helped me a lot was that aside from writing creatively, I started keeping journals, like a diary, about my mental health and how I was doing in my everyday life. And obviously, I don't write in it every single day, but I think that every time I do, I immediately think of how can I implement this into my art. I think that I really, really connected those in a almost subconscious way, because the more I started writing about my mental health, the more I started moving in that direction with my art as well. And when I put my diary aside and then I came to write little stories and creatively, again, subconsciously kind of connected the two. Maybe because even though I wrote down in my journal earlier that day or the night before, I wasn't fully done expressing what I felt, and it kind of bled through my paintings as well. Later it became more intentional, but the start of that was just that feeling of I still need more to say, but I can't verbalize it easily. And it is something that I think it's gotten so much better too, that part of not being able to verbalize it thanks to therapy and just talking to friends. But I think growing up, I had a really hard time expressing verbally my feelings and the hard situations, just because I feel like either I convinced myself that people wouldn't care, or that I was being dramatic, or maybe somebody would misunderstand me and made me feel bad about something, and then I immediately shut down for everybody else because I was scared to be treated like that again. One reason or another, I became really closed up when it came to my deep emotions. And I'm a very sensitive person. I'm very emotional, I guess. So I'm one of those persons that cries when you get mad. And that, again, made me also feel like anytime that I try to express a difficult situation or emotion to somebody, all they can focus on is like, oh, there she goes crying again. That was my feelings at the time. And that's gotten so much better. I feel like I'm such a healthy spot right now with my relationships with family and friends and being able to communicate. But that part of me, I think, stayed forever, where I feel like the deep, hard, heavy emotions I can communicate through my art. And then later, when I talk to my friends and my loved ones, that heavy side of it has already either been put on paper or on the canvas or in writing, and I'm able to communicate in a more level-headed way because that heavy emotion has already been settled through my art. And obviously, not to say that I don't have my really bad days where I just let it out with whoever I'm with, but I think my art has really, really helped my mental health in that sense. It's become like a safe place for me. And ironically, that safe space through my art is because I have opened up and moved past that um, comfort zone of creating. And I allowed myself to just be more vulnerable and put my feelings out there with my painting, regardless of, sometimes I do feel like when the people I know see my paintings, they might think like, oh, that's a weird one, or like, what are you even trying to say? And then I realized this is the same way I feel when I express them verbally. I feel like if I express my feelings, they will judge me, but if I paint them, they will judge me too. So it's kind of like, you know what, I just gotta do my thing. If people are gonna judge me, they're gonna judge me. If they're not gonna like it, they're not gonna like it. But I personally feel so much more like a lighter burden every time I finish a painting that has anything to do with my mental health or my ideas. Not all of it has to be a negative thing or like something bad I'm going through. Sometimes it's just, I feel like my imagination has something to say. And like I said, after I have created the piece, after I have sketched it out or painted the canvas, then I sit back and with my journal, I stare at it the same way that I would examine another artist's painting. The same way I would sit down, let's say, and see a Frida Kahlo painting, and for a class, I'm assigned to extract what meaning I see in it or what I think she was trying to say. I kind of do the same thing with my own art because I think it works both ways. I think sometimes I know what I'm trying to say before I paint it. Sometimes I just feel like I need to paint something and I have this image in my head that I don't know what it means. And it always does mean something. It's never because it's meaningless, it's because I don't know it yet. And then after it's made, I kind of decipher that. So yeah, this is what I've been doing recently with my art. These are the new directions that I've been taking with it and kind of like the way that I work on it before I even start hitting the canvas. It's fairly new. I would say last year is when I really took like this approach fully, and I'm still working on it, but it's become my routine. Like I think lately, every single one of my paintings that I've made, this is exactly like the step by step that I've been taking of just writing and thinking of ideas and creating like a little bit of a world behind them and then painting them, or just putting down my idea first and then going back to it and deciphering what it means and just filling journals and journals of them. So it's been really fun. And later I want to share more about that. I want to share more about like my little journal ecosystem and all of that fun stuff. But for now, I just wanted to share this and hope that it's either helpful for you or inspiring. And yeah, next time I'll be back with more paintings and more about my art process. I hope you enjoyed today's video and I'll see you again next time.